This quiet Portland electrician, a husband, a father, and a murderous sexual fetishist.
Young women are being killed in the Willamette Valley, and they have enough bodies to make the public very concerned.
We knew that we had a vicious killer out there somewhere.
Where are these young women going?
At that point, we didn't know much more.
One by one, young Oregon women disappeared.
He took my hair and rounded around like a fulcrum and started beating my head on the basement floor.
But the act of killing was only foreplay.
He enjoyed killing these girls and mutilating the bodies. This was thrill to him. Absolutely enjoyed it.
It was a slow Saturday night, and they ate us out.
Jerome Henry Brudos, the lust killer. On May 10th, 1969, fishermen made a disturbing discovery on Oregon's Long Tom River. Bobbing on the current was a woman's body, weighted to something on the river bottom.
There had been 3 or 4 disappearances of young girls, and there was sort of a feeling of hysteria almost in the communities.
4 women were missing. The floating corpse confirmed one family's worst fears. It was Linda Saley.
Linda Saley. She had been abducted from the Lloyd shopping area, a large shopping area in Portland.
She'd been strangled to death and thrown into the river, her body tied to an automobile transmission. Divers combed the river. 2 days later, they found another body. Karen Sprinker, missing since March 27th, had also been strangled.
We realized that we were dealing with probably a serial killer.
Jerome Henry Brudos, future electrician, future serial killer, was born in Webster, South Dakota on January 31st, 1939. With the end of the Great Depression still 2 long years away, farm families in the Dakotas struggled to keep going. In search of greener pastures, Jerome's father Henry moved the family to Oregon. There he hoped to find a stable job and a good place to raise his family.
His parents pick up stakes and they move to the Willamette Valley. It has Portland at its north end, Eugene at its south end, and the state capital, Salem, in the middle. Just a little bit south of the state capital is the town of Corvallis. And Jerome Brudos had come to a place that was actually kind of an idyllic place to grow up for a young boy.
But Jerome's childhood proved neither happy nor stable. With jobs so scarce, the family moved frequently.
He went to several different schools as he was growing up. I don't think he ever felt secure with his family.
Jerome's father worked 2 jobs, leaving little time for a home life. Lacking a father figure, the young boy often found himself alone with his prudish, no-nonsense mother Eileen. Prone to emotional tirades, Eileen didn't hide her abounding love for her oldest son, Larry, or her deep resentment of her youngest son, Jerry.
Jerome Brudos was born to a woman who really wanted a girl. Now, we always hear about families or fathers who say, I really want a boy. But to imagine a mother who says, I really want a girl, I don't want a boy.
How a boy, and later a man, is treated by his first relationship with a woman, his mother, is very important. If he felt that he was sort of abandoned by her and simultaneously that she almost had a lot of anger towards him for even having been born, there can definitely be a feeling of some type of backlash.
Eileen regularly chastised and punished Jerome. One incident involved a pair of patent leather high-heel shoes little Jerry found in a dump.
Here's 5-year-old Jerome Brudos. He finds this pair of women's shoes. Something had made him pick those up, rather than looking for a dump truck or a toy tractor to play with. So he brings home this pair of women's shoes, and he begins to wear them around the house.
When Eileen discovered Jerome wearing the shoes, she made him promise to get rid of them.
The shoes became taboo, and her reaction to the shoes, he didn't understand why she was so adamant that he shouldn't have those. And she berated him emotionally. So he kept those shoes.
And he kept playing with them. When Eileen discovered his deception, she became enraged.
she was really out of control, burning the shoes in front of him.
In his case, he gets this message from his mom of very strong disapproval, that this is wrong, that this is nasty, it's dirty, and he's not to be doing it.
That fueled the flame of his anger to the point where that's probably when he really started feeling powerless and vulnerable, and that combined with anger and frustration can lead to a path of destruction later on down the line.
Far from dissuading him, his mother's reaction fed his fixation. Footwear became the focus of his emerging sexuality.
He started to associate that sexual arousal with that aggressiveness, with the forbidden aspect of the shoes, and that blossomed into this very strong fetish.
Having moved in 1955, Jerome found himself living next door to a family with teenage daughters. He began to indulge his fantasies. Now 16, Jerome obsessed over the young women, going so far as to steal their underwear from a laundry line.
This was his way of satisfying himself sexually, because Jerome was a very ordinary, average-looking person. He would not have been appealing to girls of his age.
When police received calls about the thefts, Jerome saw an opportunity. He told one of the neighboring girls that he worked with the police. He persuaded her to come to his house to discuss the crimes. When she arrived, he greeted her, then disappeared.
Jerome went into a separate room, put on a mask, and came back.
The masked figure held a knife to the girl's throat and ordered her to strip.
She's forced to disrobe. He takes pictures, runs out of the room.
As the terrified girl fled the scene, Jerome pleaded with her to come back, claiming a stranger had locked him in the barn.
I was trying to convince her that it wasn't him that was doing it.
The girl doubted Brudos, but didn't report him. Having escaped consequences, he became more daring. While giving a local girl a ride home one day, he stopped at a deserted farm. There, he ordered her to strip. When she refused, Brudos became enraged.
He takes her out, beats her.
It was sadistic and it was violent. And he was, into puberty then, and that's normally when the more violent aspects start being acted out.
A couple driving by saw the struggle and called police.
They arrest him, he confesses, and then the things are found, the shoes, the underwear, the camera.
Investigators discovered naked photos of Jerome's neighbor. They questioned her and she described his attack. Corvallis police knew that they had arrested a disturbed teenager. But no one suspected the horrible crimes that this freckle-faced kid was capable of. And when set free, Jerome Brudos and his disturbing sexual fantasies would quickly spiral out of control. In 1956, 17-year-old Jerome Brudos was a deeply troubled teen. He had a fetish for women's shoes and underwear, which he stole and secretly wore. He'd been arrested after beating one girl and forcing another to strip at knife point. Authorities sent Jerome to Oregon State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Doctors rehabilitated.
Most people have seen the movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson. That's the hospital. That's the building that he went to. And if you saw the kind of pathology that was exhibited in that movie, that's the kind of environment that a young Jerome Brudos went into.
There, Jerome told psychiatrists about his fantasies. He envisioned an underground prison where he could stash captured girls.
He'd go by certain cells or something. He could pull out a girl whenever he wanted to.
These desires, born in the disturbed mind of a sexual fetishist, did not alarm Jerome's psychiatrists. Unfortunately, the experts saw it in a more benign light.
They let him go to school during the day and then come back to the hospital at night. And yet when they sat down to look at what he'd been doing and the way he'd been acting, they found, well, he's not really suffering from anything that's permanent. It's just, again, the same kind of explanation that his parents were giving. It's a phase. He'll grow out of it.
January 1957, after 9 months in the Oregon State Hospital, psychiatrists diagnosed Brudos as borderline schizophrenic. In spite of this diagnosis, they deemed him safe to live in society and released him. Brudos went home to finish high school. Although he demonstrated clear intelligence, excelling in electronics, he lacked the motivation to succeed and graduated near the bottom of his class. After failing to find a job, Brudos enlisted in the Army in 1959. The Army stationed him in Fort Ord in Monterey Bay, California.
He ends up going into the Army, and he has these weird fantasies and dreams and things that just aren't real. And then he ends up going to see the shrink, and the shrink decides this guy is too disturbing to leave in the Army, so we're going to get rid of him.
Discharged by the Army because of his peculiar obsessions, he returned to Oregon to live with his mother. It was a cold reception. Eileen insisted that Jerome sleep in the shed behind her house. He soon lapsed into his old habits. He stole women's shoes and underwear, and as the pressure of his compulsions increased, he again turned to assaulting women.
In broad daylight, he tried to kidnap a lady that worked for the telephone company. She was coming back from lunch, and as she was going into her office, he tried to grab her.
When she resisted, he choked her. She fell to the ground, unconscious. He took her shoes and left her lying there.
What was growing inside his head was getting worse because, like most compulsions, the first things you're compelled to do are apparently satisfying to you in some way, sexual or psychological, but at some point they're not enough, so you have to do more.
Jerome Brudos, still a virgin, wasn't sure how to do more. Since moving home, he worked as an engineer at a local radio station. A friend at the station set him up on a date with a pretty 17-year-old named Ralphine.
That was the first positive thing, the first interacting social behavior that he'd ever engaged in.
Ralphine became smitten with what she saw as a responsible, well-off 23-year-old man. He showed her romance and gentle affection. When Ralphine became pregnant, her reluctant parents consented to a marriage. The couple married in the spring of 1962. Ralphine, young and naive, initially complied with the demands of her older, very controlling husband.
He does things like tell her that she's to walk around and do housework and cook in the kitchen naked except for a pair of high heels.
Jerome also forbade Ralphine to enter his basement workshop. There he built a darkroom to print X-rated pictures.
There were pictures of Ralphine in various states of dress and undress with some of these items of clothing that he had stolen from other places.
In Ralphine, Jerry created the captive doll wife he always dreamed of. At first, the docile and inexperienced young woman thought nothing of her husband's odd demands.
People are always looking for the best in other people, and we want to explain away unusual or odd behaviors. And when you're married to somebody like that, it just becomes part of the way that you deal with protecting yourself.
Jerome couldn't keep a job, and the family moved constantly. Gradually, Ralphine grew more assertive. She refused to be photographed or play Jerome's dress-up games. As Ralphine pulled away, Brudos sought other ways to fulfill his sexual fantasies. He secretly dressed in women's clothing, often wearing women's underwear under his work clothes. To feed his fetish, Brudos stole clothes from women he fancied.
Psychologically, stealing women's clothing gives him a sense that he's in control of women, whether they like him to be or not.
And a chance meeting on the streets of downtown Portland gave him a target.
He saw this good-looking girl in downtown Portland, and he followed her for a couple blocks, and she got onto a bus. He got on the bus with her, followed her home.
Brudos watched the woman enter her apartment and waited until she went to bed.
And he went into the apartment, again, was stealing some of her clothes. She awoke, He jumped on the bed, strangled her, and had sex with her.
With the rape, Jerry slipped further into his sadistic fantasy world. The next step would be all too easy. For 10 years after his teenage incarceration at the Oregon State Hospital, Jerome Brudos managed to stay under the radar of the law. In 1967, as an electrician, husband, and father, the 28-year-old appeared to be a model citizen, but under the surface simmered disturbing and increasingly violent desires. Shortly after the birth of his second child, Brudos attacked and raped a woman.
The raping of the woman really describes psychopathic progression. He's acting out, he's getting bolder, he's getting braver, he has more confidence in his ability to commit these kinds of crimes and go undetected.
And frustrations at home drove Jerome to greater excess. His wife Ralphine busied herself raising their 2 children. She had no time to indulge his sexual fantasies. In a bid for attention, he left startling photos of himself around the house for his wife to find.
There were photographs of Jerome dressed in women's clothing, hose and high heels.
His wife ignored the cross-dressing photos, and increasingly, Brudos spent time alone in his basement workshop.
When these people get married, they pick somebody who's not really going to ask too many questions. She doesn't really want to know the full story. I think that would be too psychologically damaging.
On January 26, 1968, the blow didn't kill her. Brudos finished the job by strangling Linda until her body went limp.
The hallmarks of psychopathy are this lack of empathy, a sense of entitlement, narcissism. Most serial killers are psychopaths. It is the personality disorder that allows them to commit a homicide and come up and deal with their family as if nothing's happened.
Choosing from his collection of women's underwear, Brudos dressed Slauson's body in high heels and lingerie. He snapped photograph after photograph.
He took a hacksaw and
while his family slept, Brudos loaded the remains of Linda Slauson's corpse into his car. He tied the body to an automobile transmission and tossed it into the Long Tom River. The following day, Linda Slauson's family began a frantic missing persons search. Oregon State Police were stymied. Privately, Jerome Henry Brudos basked in the afterglow of his first murder. It would be 10 months before he would kill again.
With serial killers, there's going to be that cooling off period, and that cooling off period will start to probably get shorter and shorter as they go along.
In the intervening months, Jerome moved his family to Salem. Their new house had a separate garage, perfect for a very private workshop. On the night of November 26, 1968, Brudos raped the dying girl on the front seat of his family automobile.
In his garage.
There's also an underlying current of violence and anger in him, a feeling that he had a very bad relationship with his mother, that he feels very angry that he wasn't what she wanted, that there's a lot of shame. That shame is tied up in sexuality because his mother did not want him wearing women's shoes. And that representation of sexuality he transferred onto women in general in the society.
Brudos kept the body of Jan Whitney hanging in the garage for 5 days, repeatedly assaulting her corpse.
Jerry Brudos would be a lust killer. The lust killer will kill and have sex with them after death. And so necrophilia is one of his primary motivations.
With Whitney's body still hanging, Jerome took his family away for the long weekend. While they vacationed, a freak accident occurred at the house, nearly exposing Jerome's dark secrets.
A car had run into his garage in part of his workshop. Somebody called the police. The police came out and was looking at the accident.
The unsuspecting police never saw Whitney's body.
And the officer himself actually had tried to look into the garage through a crack in the boards. Had he have seen inside, Jan Susan Whitney was hanging in that workshop.
Brudos thrilled at his close call with the police.
He thought he was highly intelligent. The police were, down at a lower level than he was in life.
When his excitement abated, Jerome tired of his latest trophy. He dumped Jan Whitney's body off a bridge into the Willamette River. 2 Oregon women now vanished, yet still, no one suspected that a vicious serial killer was loose in the Northwest. By the spring of 1969, 2 Oregon women had been murdered at the hands of Jerome Brudos. Both corpses had been raped and mutilated. The killings had followed chance encounters with Brudos. His fantasies about murdering women had escalated to serial murder. And the 30-year-old electrician was through waiting for women to come to him. He was about to start hunting his victims.
Just imagine how bold he's become at this point. He's already raped, he's already killed, he's stolen women's underwear, he's done all those things. Now it seems as though he wants to do something even bolder.
On March 27th, he chose a stalking ground, the parking garage of the Meyer and Frank department store in Salem. The first woman he saw was Karen Sprinker, a student at Oregon State University.
The Sprinkers lived in South Salem, probably about 2 miles away from where Meyer and Frank's store is. She was coming down there just to have lunch with her mother that day.
In an isolated corner of the garage, Jerome seized Karen and forced her into his car.
He had I believe, a toy pistol, and he abducted her with that pistol, took her to his workshop, and apparently she tried everything in her power to save her life.
Had her disrobe, had her pose in different get-ups, high heel shoes and whatnot.
To secure his prisoner, Brudos looped a noose around Sprinker's neck and attached it to the ceiling, spreading the rope through a hoist called a come-along.
He just ratcheted up the come-along and took her feet a couple, 3 inches off the floor, walked in the house, had something to eat, and watched a cartoon while she strangled at the end of that rope.
When Brudos returned to the garage, Karen was dead. He abused the corpse, but he wasn't finished. Brudos wanted a trophy.
He takes this woman, he cuts her breasts off, he makes a cast from them, and then he attempts to make some kind of bronze bust of a woman's breast.
Jerome tied Karen Sprinker's body to an engine block. Unobserved, he hoisted the body over the side of a bridge into the Long Tom River. As Brudos disposed of the body, Sprinker's family and friends tried to make sense of her shocking disappearance.
I knew there was something wrong. Just ran a cold chill up my spine. We had talked to the police, notified them that she was missing.
Police publicized Karen's disappearance and followed up on dozens of fruitless leads. Meanwhile, the Sprinker family organized search parties, desperate to believe she would eventually be found. As Davis and the Sprinkers clung to hope, another young woman walked into fatal danger. On April 21st, watching her cross the street to a Portland Center University parking garage, Brudos picked out Sharon Wood. She fit the profile, slim, attractive, and alone.
I went down the stairs, and as I got down there, this guy was pointing a gun at me, and he says, "If you don't scream, I won't shoot you." He got his arm around my head, and he got somehow my jaw clamped down on his thumb in the struggle. Last thing I remember was he just really hit my head very hard, and I saw stars, and then he jumped up and ran.
Sharon's resistance spooked Brudos, but he managed to escape without attracting attention. Sadly, the Portland police didn't immediately connect Sharon's attacker with the woman who'd been reported missing. Brudos struck again, this time at a much younger target named Gloria Smith.
There was a 12-year-old that was on her way to school, Parrish Junior High School in North Salem. Jerry Brudos, with a pistol, accosted her and kidnapped her and took her back toward his car. And as they went through between two houses, the lady across the street happened to be working in her flower van.
Brudos got in his car and drove away, nursing another failure.
The girls that fought him ran, screamed, or whatever, escaped. He was not that type of personality that would have chased him down and killed him right there. He wanted him for a toy in his workshop.
He realized he needed to lure his victims rather than scare them. He bought a fake police badge and began staking out the parking garage at the Lloyd Center Mall in Portland. There, he spotted 22-year-old Linda Saley. As Linda walked to her car, arms full of birthday presents for her boyfriend, Brudos approached.
He confronted her and with a badge, saying that he was a security officer and that they'd been getting a lot of shopliftings going on, and she'd have to come down to the police station for further questioning.
Reluctantly, Linda got into Jerome's car. He drove her all the way from Portland to Salem and straight into his garage.
He took her inside of his workshop, tied her up. He goes to dinner. He eats his dinner, he comes back out, and the girl was sitting there, untied, and didn't move. So she must have had in her head that he was going to release her.
Jerome retied Linda and suspended her from the ceiling while he undressed and photographed her.
She could just stand on her toes, you know, and not choke. And then when he thought he had enough or whatever, he just gave it a couple more cranks and choked her.
They don't feel emotion the way that normal people do. The dichotomy between going up and eating with his family and the fact that there was a victim in the basement dying made him feel like a very, very accomplished predator.
Jerome tied Linda's body to an engine block and once again headed for the bridge crossing the Long Tom River. For Brudos, this wasn't a perfect murder. He hadn't taken a trophy.
He didn't cut her breasts off. When I asked him why, he said the breasts were pink for her. There was no little discolored ring around the nipple, and he didn't like that.
Serial killers keep on killing because you embellish and develop this fantasy until you'll have the perfect murder.
Brudos knew he could have the perfect murder as long as no one stopped him, and he believed himself to be so much smarter than his pursuers that no one ever would. Between January of 1968 and April of 1969, at least 4 women disappeared from Oregon's Willamette Valley. Police were growing increasingly concerned and frustrated. They didn't yet know the victims were dead. 30-year-old Jerome Henry Brudos, a sex fetishist and serial rapist, was killing at will. Then, a stunning discovery changed everything. 2 of the bodies that Brudos so cleverly hid were found. On May 10, 1969, a local fisherman discovered a woman's weathered body floating in the Long Tom River. Police correctly identified her as Linda Saley. An autopsy revealed evidence of strangulation.
We had a vicious killer out there somewhere. At that point, we didn't know much more.
After the discovery of Saley's body, investigators conducted a thorough search of the river. 2 days later, police recovered the body of Karen Sprinker, also a strangled victim, just feet from where Saley's body surfaced. While news of the vicious murders shocked and sickened locals, Jerome Brudos simply shrugged. He remained confident that any evidence found would not link him to the bodies.
The bodies were tied with a rope with a knot. The knot was unusual. The knot was used by electricians when they're pulling wire through a house.
As police combed their files on electricians, another investigation began at Oregon State, where Karen Sprinker had gone to school.
The police department in Benton County interviewed a lot of girls out of the college to determine if any of those girls had ran into and had dates with a strange individual.
After talking to hundreds of girls, investigators made a crucial discovery.
One of the girls actually had a date, a coke date, with a young man who was driving a station wagon. Had a lot of baby clothes and young kids' clothes in the car.
Another student reported meeting a man wandering the dormitories. The man explained that he was a Vietnam vet looking for companionship. He wouldn't stop talking about the bodies and the missing women. She found it creepy and agreed to help police lure him into a trap.
The police over there made it known to her that if he called again, to be sure and let them know, and he did. The police were waiting for him. He readily identified himself as Jerry Brudos.
Detective Jim Stovall requested a police background check on Brudos and discovered that he worked as an electrician. But more importantly, Stovall learned of Jerome's previous hospitalizations for attacks on teenage girls. Wanting to learn more, Detective Stovall paid Brudos a visit.
So we went around to where his garage is and talked there. The officers found a rope that the bodies of Karen Sprinker and Sally had been tied down with. So there was clear indication that he might be responsible.
The officers didn't have a search warrant. Without the rope, they lacked crucial evidence. Inexplicably, Brudos solved their problem.
And he says, you seem to be interested in that rope. Would you like to have a piece of it? I says, yeah, that'd be great. So he cut me off a piece.
Serial killers are convinced that they're smarter than law enforcement. They start to taunt the police, and they start to get sloppy because they think the police can't catch them.
With an assist from the murderer, forensic scientists quickly linked Brudos to the rope used to bind his victims. Despite his bravado, Brudos felt alarmed by the police questioning. He paid a discreet visit to attorney Dale Drake.
He maintained his innocence completely, and I advised him that that was great if he was innocent, but if he were guilty, that he should not allow the police to search his house and or cars.
Brudos took the advice to heart. By the time police obtained a search warrant for his car, he'd beaten them to the punch.
The whole inside of his car was soaking wet. And so I said, well, hey, Jerry, what happened to your car? He says, oh, we went to a car wash and my boy left the window down and flooded it.
Police desperately needed evidence to charge and arrest Brudos. If Gloria Smith, the junior high girl he attacked on April 22nd, could ID him, they could at least hold him on kidnapping charges. They showed her a photo lineup.
had about 10 or 12 pictures, and I laid them out in front of her. And I told her, take your time, look very carefully at each one, and if you see anyone that looks familiar, let me know. She stopped in the middle and said, well, this looks like him, but he had freckles all over. Well, it was a picture of Jerry Brudos.
On May 30th, 1969, police caught up with Jerome and Ralphine Brudos driving north towards the Canadian border. Police followed, armed with an arrest warrant.
We decided we would execute the warrant of arrest. And when we got to Salem, he didn't get off the freeway, he kept going. North, we stopped the car and I placed him under arrest.
250 miles from the border, police found Brudos hiding under a blanket in the back seat.
When we arrested him,
hiding under a blanket in the back seat.
When we arrested him, dressed him down, put him in prison clothes. He's wearing ladies' silk panties. He said they feel more comfortable today.
He called me from the city jail about midnight on that night that he was arrested, asked if I would come down. I did come down, and we had about a 5-hour session where he confessed to me to each of the murders and told me grim, grisly details of each incident.
Drake listened, stunned by the crimes and by his client's lack of remorse.
Jerome was completely cold, utterly devoid of any human emotions when he was describing some of the most hideous crimes that have ever been committed. Basically advised him to remain silent, not to have any contact with the police.
The police held Brudos in custody, but could they keep him there? May 30th, 1969. Oregon authorities arrested Jerome Brudos on kidnapping charges, 4 drowned bodies, a murder weapon, and a positive ID from an escaped victim all pointed to Brudos being the killer. Still, police needed more evidence or a confession to book him for murder. Brudos sat silently in custody, but Detective Jim Stovall knew how to get him to talk.
He claimed to have an IQ of 165. So you have to play on that. Let him be the intellectual. Let him think he's leading an interview. But you always keep him on track.
Stovall asked hypothetical questions that Brudos couldn't resist answering.
He approached Brudos as a friend and a father figure, a very compassionate, sort of a caring kind of approach, because Jim Stovall knew exactly and precisely what he was doing, and he had sized Brudos up remarkably well, even early on. Brudos, I think, was bragging to Stovall, wanted to impress Stovall, and wanted Stovall's friendship and acceptance.
Eventually, all pretenses disappeared, and the killer rambled into a complete confession.
He started from day one with the little encyclopedia salesgirl in Portland, how he killed her, the Slauson girl, Whitney girl, and the Sally girl, and what he did with the bodies. So the whole thing came to light pretty quick.
Brudos even explained a few things police hadn't been able to figure out. For instance, the mysterious burn marks on Linda Saley's ribcage. It had been an experiment.
And he hooked up 2 nails, one on each side, stuck them in the rib cage, and then plugged it into an electrical current to see what would happen. Would the body jump, or like a frog when it's in a skillet?
The way the serial killers work is they need more and more stimulation. For a normal person, we get excited by a lot of different things, but for them, they have maybe a low level of cortisol, and they need to raise that level, and the way that they do it is by escalating their behavior.
And Brudos showed no remorse.
He enjoyed killing these girls and mutilating the bodies. He enjoyed assaulting the bodies after they were dead even. This was a thrill to him. Absolutely enjoyed it.
He had no conscience and he had no remorse. He told me that the women that he slaughtered were nothing more than objects to him. And metaphorically, I think Brudos actually described them as a candy wrapper. Once you're done with them, you just discard them. Why would you not discard them? You don't have any more use for them.
With Brudos's confession, police obtained a search warrant for his workshop. There, on June 3rd, they began collecting evidence.
I remember the photographs were taped to the drawer of a red Craftsman tool chest. And there were pictures of all of the slain women in various states of dress and undress, some alive, some deceased.
One was of Karen Sprinker while she was alive, standing, as I recall, without clothes other than high heels, and the look on her face is a look that you don't forget. Her hands were clenched in fists that spoke volumes about the fear and the terror that he had instilled in her.
In one photograph, the lust-crazed killer was so absorbed in his fantasy that he didn't notice his own presence in the frame.
He had put a mirror under her body and was shooting a photograph that would reflect up into her private area, and while leaning over to take the picture, took his own picture as well in the mirror.
In the house, investigators found more ghastly evidence.
With Karen Sprinker, he cut her breasts off and made the paperweights. And we found the paperweights on the mantel in his home.
And when they found Jan Whitney's car keys in Jerome's house, they had the evidence to charge him with 3 counts of murder.
It became very clear as a defense attorney that Jerome was guilty, and it was going to be difficult to craft any type of legal offense other than legal insanity.
On June 4th, 1969, a team of psychiatrists subjected Brudos to a battery of tests.
So now he's got to pull every trick out of the bag. He's got to say, yes, I did it, but I'm crazy. Yes, I did it, but my mother made me do it.
There were a total of 7 evaluations done. And unfortunately, all 7 agreed that he was not criminally insane.
On June 27th, Jerome Henry Brudos quietly appeared before Judge Val Sloper in the Marion County Courthouse. Charged with 3 counts of murder, he pled guilty to everything.
The judge interviewed him very carefully, and he was off to the penitentiary. It was over with. Everybody could take a sigh of relief.
Brudos received 3 consecutive life sentences, worth at least 36 years. The lust killer would be 66 before becoming eligible for parole. But what about Ralphine? Investigators found it hard to believe that she had no part in her husband's crimes.
She was charged as an accomplice, was found not guilty.
I've always known I wasn't guilty.
She terminated Jerome Henry's parental rights with the 2 children, and I just understand it left the area.
Abandoned by Ralphine and ostracized by other prisoners, Jerome spent his lonely hours in the Oregon State Penitentiary by filing appeals.
He appeared before the parole board on numerous occasions. It became very obvious he was not ever going to get out of the penitentiary.
Yeah, I've gone a lot of places and done a lot of things. I'm assuming that I never hurt anybody because I never got any complaints from anybody.
In his cell, he started his own prison library.
He ordered women's clothing catalogs and shoe catalogs while he was in prison because, again, his compulsion didn't end with his conviction. He was still sick behind bars.
Eventually, Brudos became the longest living inmate of the Oregon Penitentiary. He died of liver cancer at the age of 67 on March 29, 2006.
Jerome Brudos is the personification of cold, deliberate evil, and I'm glad he's not living anymore.
By the time he died, Jerome Brudos' life was as meaningless to the world as his victims' lives had been to him.
Jerome Henry is like a 2-headed snake or a chicken with 5 legs. Why God created that type of a creature, I have no idea.